This is a live stream, and it is in English. The first time ever in English. English isn't my native language, but we need to speak English today, talk English today, due to the fact I got a friend with me here, a friend from the US. Here, I got a friend, Mr. Phil Witney from the US. He is also very much interested in trains. We are going to talk about the subject of trains, three things actually. We're going to talk about when he was in part of a project of marketing X2000 to the American market, for the customer Amtrak, which was still is the government-controlled main railway operator, passenger railway operator in the US. And also we went together on the first trip with the SG3000 here in Sweden. We're going to discuss that and talk about that. And also he recently made a very nice trip to a scenic railway in the US. He can just briefly tell about that. So three different subjects. Who is Phil Witney? Okay, I will fit that himself into the picture. This man here is married to a woman who happens to be the sister of Harriet, who lives with me. So they were coming over for a visit the other day, just as spontaneous. We didn't know about it. And I've been visiting relatives and so on. That's the reason why I haven't been able to produce so many train movies. So he is, well, I'm not married to Harriet, but he is a bonus family, whatever you call it. Okay. Now, he is married to my Harriet's sister and living in the U.S. in an island of
Cranberry Island.
Cranberry Island. Sorry, yes, Cranberry Island. It's up in the state of
Maine.
State of Maine, yeah. But you were working at the U.S. Embassy here in Stockholm when you met your wife to be.
That's correct.
Yes, yeah. Wife to be.
Yeah.
And you have been in many different countries, and then I think you went to Cambodia.
That's right. That was my last tour of duty. Was Cambodia.
But Cambodia, yes. And then you retired.
Yes.
Retired.
Allegedly.
Yeah. You were not old at that time, but you retired, and you moved back to an island where your family has a number of estates.
Well, I inherited my grandparents' home.
Yeah.
On Cranberry Island.
Okay.
Yeah.
But now you were visiting here, you're coming on frequent visits to Sweden together with
Yes.
your wife. Now, it came to my knowledge that you were interested in trains. Can you just very briefly describe how you were interested in trains?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to express my appreciation here to John Eric for giving me the opportunity to speak in this forum and hopefully provide some information from my perspective on railroading and have a good chat here with John Eric about our experiences on train travel, as well as talk about one particular railroad operation in the United States. So again, thanks for the opportunity for this, and I look forward to this chat. I've been a lifelong railroad fan. I can't remember a time when I did not like trains. And as a youngster, my father used to take me up to the nearest railroad station, which was in Ellsworth, Maine. And I grew up in Southwest Harbor. And we would go up on sometimes Sunday afternoons or whatever and see the local passenger train come in, and I was just fascinated by that. And later on, we went up to Bangor, Maine. You can locate all these cities on the website or maps. And I would get a chance to ride the yard switcher engines in the freight yard. The train crews saw me standing there looking interested and invited me on board the engines.
So they invited you to go on?
No, they would invite me.
Yes.
And I would ride for the afternoon on the yard switches.
You must be a lucky guy.
Oh, very lucky. And so I have some great memories of that. And the freight yards in Bangor are no longer there. But those were great times. And then over the years, I've traveled a little bit by passenger trains. The trains were dying out in America in the 1950s and 60s. And Amtrak, the National Railroad Passenger System, was formed in 1971 at the very nadir of passenger rail travel. And because of that formation, they managed to save a basic railroad system nationwide in the United States. And today it's gradually grown stronger and stronger in terms of financing and the quality of train service and so forth. So I've seen both the decline of passenger service with private operated railroads in the United States in the 1950s and the 60s, and ridden on some of those trains and seen what you might call the worst of passenger rail travel. And then later on, I've had a chance to ride a few of the Amtrak trains, and as I said, they have steadily improved in service. I must qualify this by saying that when I say improved service, it probably in most cases does not match the quality of train service in Sweden. And now recently, and we may talk about this later, in the last week Amtrak has had, last month or so, Amtrak has had a series of well-publicized incidences involving train wrecks, which are giving it a bad name. It may be unfair to say that, but Amtrak is very much in the headline news now in the United States because of this negative publicity. So there.
Okay, that's your back. You really have a solid background in trains and train operations. I didn't know that. It came to a surprise to me.
I should mention too, very quickly,
yeah, please do.
Because of my travels overseas and living overseas in various posts as part of my career, I've had a chance to travel several trains overseas, some interesting rides that I might not have been able to do otherwise in some fairly remote operations. So that's been very, very interesting.
So we have a number of subjects that we can cover at the later,
sure.
another live stream.
Sure.
Because I haven't included those travels
that's right.
in this one. So now, if we're trying to get back or not further on to this, the X2000 marketing campaign in the US. The X2000 train, I think, about 25 years ago, it came live here in Sweden. There were ambitions to market it and sell it in other countries. They later sold at least one or two trains to China, but that's another story. We can come back to that another time. But they also tried to market it for the line between, was it Boston, New York?
Between Boston, New York, and Washington. D.C., yeah.
And they called it Acela Express.
Acela, A-C-E-L-A, is the operation or the company that they finally went with. They did not choose the X2000.
They didn't do, but there were at least ambitions from the Swedish side, from the SJ at that time, and for the manufacturer, which was Acela Traction, to sell it in the US. And how did you get involved in this? Can you?
Yeah, I was assigned here to the embassy in Stockholm between 1990 and 1993. And my job here had nothing to do with transportation or railroads or anything. I was more in overseeing security operations for the U.S. government here at the embassy. But the ambassador here at the time learned that I was a very interested rail fan and had a little bit of knowledge of trains and train travel. So there was this particular group from Amtrak and other United States railroad officials, Federal Railroad Administration people, and political representatives, things like that, that were coming as a delegation to Sweden through the U.S. Embassy. And they were exploring what the X2000 train was all about as a possibility for use in the United States. So I was asked if I would be interested in being the United States liaison between the embassy and between the group as they traveled around Sweden on the trains, and I jumped at the chance for obvious
Yes,
reasons.
I want.
Yeah. Great way to see Sweden and travel by rail and even get paid to do it.
Yes,
so you can't argue with that. So that was back in. I guess I was here from 1990 to 93, so I guess it was back around 1991 that this all occurred. So that's how I happened to be joining the group to go around Sweden on this. In terms of my influence on anything, it was zero. I was just there getting acquainted with the folks, and if they needed any assistance in terms of liaison with the embassy, I would do that. But I had no expertise that I could offer them. And so it was basically as much of a learning experience for me as it was for the U.S. folks coming over.
It's okay. Did you travel on the train?
Yes.
You went on the X2000?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we went a number of places, as I recall.
Oh, yeah.
And I forget exactly now how far we went, but I got a chance to ride up in the head end compartment of the train, and I got a chance to know many of the people in the delegation and listen to what they were having to say. And it was quite a thrill because when you're up there and you're going at very high rates of speed, I had not traveled at that high rate of speed before, so for me it was quite a thrill that way. And so we had a generally good time, and I really hoped that they might accept the X2000 in the States. I thought it was a great train, and so there. Go ahead.
Okay, but they actually shipped one train set over to the U.S. and run it.
That's right.
Were you part of that?
No. My only participation in the whole project was here in Sweden for that several days that they were here. But once they shipped a prototype to the United States and started doing tests with it, I was not involved at all.
This is Odenton, MD. What's that is?
Odenton, Maryland.
Maryland.
State of Maryland.
State of Maryland.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. You can see the train running there on electricity. There was showing it on diesel online without electricity. You pushed it with a diesel engine.
The section of track between.
This is another one. I think
parts of the track are electrified and part are diesel.
But this is not the X2000. This is ICE. I think one of the competitors.
I think probably.
Yeah, it says Amtrak X2000 ICE train. So this is ICT with the competitor.
Yeah.
But they didn't select any of those.
No.
No, they selected some other.
I forget the actual company that Acela is. I'm not sure if it was Bombardier or it was some other company. I forget now.
Some other company, okay. But that was an interesting experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I should mention that now the track between Boston and Washington, especially between New York and Washington, has been upgraded significantly to accommodate the higher speed trains. Again, they're not as high speed as here in Europe.
They're not.
No, but it's
because the X2000 runs at 200, 205.
Yeah, no, they don't go that fast in America. But it's proven the high speed travel, not necessarily the X2000, but the high speed travel has proven very successful.
Yeah.
And it's attracted a lot of passengers away from the airlines on that route, and consequently now they haul more passengers than the airlines do along that system.
Okay.
Yeah, it's taken away quite a bit of plane patronage.
The successor of the X2000 was the SG3000. It's a new lightweight train based on the Regina platform, And it happened, you were coming to Sweden at that exact moment when they did the first commercial trip with the train.
By sheer coincidence.
By
I
sheer
happened to be
coincidence,
here at that
yeah.
time.
And I knew about this story that you were with the X2000 trying to market to the US.
Yeah.
You were coming here.
And by sheer coincidence, I happened to know John Eric, who was the most famous rail traveler in Sweden at the time.
At that time. So I bought some tickets on the first train going up. Well, the train went up to Sundsvall at that time. The line up to Umeå wasn't finished at that time. But it was scheduled to go to Sundsvall. We went up to Gävle, just about 1 hour and a half, on this first trip. And we also went, there was some kind of ceremony at the departure when the manager of the SG company made a speech and so on. And then we went on the train. I have tried to see if I could find any photos from that event. I remember I took some photos, but I couldn't find them. Neither photos or video from that moment. But I have it in my memory. But I think you really like that.
Oh, I was thrilled about it. The X2000, I think, big deal. This, of course, was the next generation. It was even better. And I'm sure the service today is just as good as it was on that inaugural run, but to be on that first run and experience the first class service and the first class train travel in Sweden, that was very memorable to me, and John Eric and I had a very nice day of it, going up there and coming back.
Yes, I remember that. I also remember that you really appreciate it.
Yes,
yes. Because you are a train fan, and being on the inaugural, the first trip, is also something particular.
Yes. Yeah.
And the train has become a real good success.
Yeah.
It's not as a big technological leap because it's based on an already existing platform, but the service concept as such, it has proven to be a very successful train. So it was great to be able to offer you that possibility. And you happen to be at that moment here in Sweden.
And what I was also fascinated by was how John Eric, everybody knew John Eric, and John Eric knew everybody. And so it was just interesting sitting back when I wasn't looking at the scenery. I was watching John Eric shaking hands and saying hello to so many of the people along the train route and the crew on the trains and things. So it was a very, very nice trip.
But you're still interested in trains.
Oh yes.
Yes. You went with your wife you made travel with a scenic railway.
Yes.
There's a lot of scenic railways, by the way.
There are now, yeah. When this particular one now is one of the most successful in America. And it's called the Conway Scenic Railway. And it's located in the state of New Hampshire, which is right up in the northeastern corner of the United States, right next to the state of Maine, where I live. And it's trackage that, let's see, coming from the south, it was the old Boston and Maine Railroad. And so from 1961 until 1972, it was just freight-only service up there. But by 1972, there was almost no freight service left, nothing to haul. So it was abandoned in October of 1972. And I took a trip over there with my father and brother sometime around 1971. And that area that you see there where the train station is was pretty much, it was still officially operating, but the tracks were overgrown and rusted. The roundhouse was dilapidated. The train station was closed up, boarded up, and dilapidated. And things looked pretty end of the line, so to speak, for the railroad. But in 1974, 2 years after abandonment, a non-profit organization was formed, and they called it the Conway Scenic Railroad. And they started running special passenger trains on that segment of former Boston and Maine Railroad line from Conway, New Hampshire, south, North Conway, New Hampshire, south to Conway, New Hampshire, about 10 or 11 miles, which I forget what it would be kilometers. But and it proved successful right from the start. And since then, they have gradually and steadily grown. And there's a connecting railroad line from Portland, Maine, that ran northwest up through New Hampshire and parts of the state of Vermont, the neighboring state, which went on to Montreal. In the old days, you could take a passenger train from Portland right up through North Conway and then on into Montreal. And that service had also been gradually abandoned. Passenger service on that line ended in November of 1957, and freight service had ended in late 1983. The states of Maine and New Hampshire had taken over the railroad lines to try to preserve them. And then eventually the Conway Scenic Railroad in New Hampshire had gotten permission from the state of New Hampshire to operate their lines, extend their operation further north up through what's called the White Mountains of New Hampshire, a very scenic portion of railway. And when the Maine Central Railroad had operated the line from Portland, Maine, up through New Hampshire and to Montreal, it was called the Mountain Division. Their railroad line was called the Mountain Division. So, and it was the prettiest segment of railroading in the northeastern United States. So Conway Scenic Railroad took that over probably 25 years ago now and began operating trains up through the mountains, and that became very successful also. Now they run many trains in the spring, summer, and autumn. They have special trains at Christmas time that they run for the Christmas season, and they run railroad fan trips as well as regularly scheduled tourist runs. They have not only coaches, but they have dining cars. These are older cars that they've acquired, and they have different types of older locomotives, diesel locomotives, but they also have a steam locomotive that runs occasionally, and they have a wonderful operation. The railroad station you see was built in the, I believe it's the 1880s, and it's a one-of-a-kind in North America. The architecture is Russian Orthodox style, and by sheer coincidence, a couple that rented a house from my parents in my home of Southwest Harbor, the man's grandfather was the architect, the designer of the station. And he was interested in railroads, and as a kid I chatted with him about it, and I found that a fascinating connection to what is now the Conway Scenic Railroad. I have some photos that I took from that trip with my father and brother in 1971, some slides, Kodak slides. And so it's fascinating to look at those now and see how things looked before the Conway Scenic Railroad took things over, and to see the dramatic, wonderful changes that have been made on that line, saving that line and the experience for people since the time we were there. I should mention, and then we can talk a little more, that my wife and I did this trip last fall, and we ate in the dining car. They served lunch going up through the White Mountains, and it was a very delicious lunch. You had your choice, 2 options, I think 3 options actually, a meat dish, a fish dish, and a vegetarian dish probably. So we had a great time. You get the chance to meet a lot of other people who are basically rail fans or are interested in the travel. And we got up to, we went as far as what was called, the Notch station at the top of what's called Crawford Notch, which is a very scenic, steep section of the railroad line that goes along the sides of the mountains. It's cliffs. And at the top of the notch, once you get through the notch, there was a station there, Crawford Notch, and it served a big hotel in the old days called the Crawford Notch House, and that burned down in a great fire in the I think in the 1960s, long after it had closed. But now the station has been preserved and is used by the Conway Scenic Railroad, and also there is another building there used by the Appalachian Mountain Club for hikers that are hiking the Appalachian Trail and other mountains in the White Mountains. So it's quite a tourist destination up there. And so we turned around up there, had an hour layover, and turned around, and then came back down the line to North Conway. And we got some really nice photographs and had a very, very nice day.
It was a day trip.
It was a day trip, yes.
Yeah.
But it takes pretty much a full day because the train goes slow. And they, as I said...
You have to eat and drink.
Yeah, and they want you to have time to eat and drink. And then you have an hour layover up at Crawford Notch Station.
Yeah.
And some wonderful scenic views on a nice day. So we thoroughly got our money's worth and had a very nice time. I should mention, John Eric, that the railroad station itself has been completely refurbished, and they have done it to keep it looking like it was back at 1890s or 1900. And you can peek inside, and where they actually are selling the tickets and doing business, it's set up just like it was way back in the old days. So you have a telegraph system that's there, and typewriters and other equipment that no longer nowadays is obsolete. But it's just like looking back in time when you look through the door of the ticket booth and you see the folks working in there. And the rest of the building is utilized as a museum of old American railroading memorabilia, mostly from the Boston and Maine Railroad, Maine Central Railroad, and other New England railroads. And then another section of the building is a beautiful gift shop, and they have some very interesting railroad books and railroad recordings and CDs, as well as your usual mugs and T-shirts and things like that. But it's good quality items. It's not a cheap operation at all. So it's a wonderful experience for a rail fan.
So it's a railroad that you really recommend.
Oh, highly recommend.
Yeah, I recommend it. Yes.
Yeah, I if you cannot have a regular commercially operating passenger freight operation, this is the next best thing. They have tried to preserve things as it used to be. It's a trip back in time, and they have a lot of railroad cars in the yard there by the station, passenger cars, freight cars, engines, and they've gradually built up their inventory, their archives over time. They've completely refurbished the roundhouse, and that's used as a roundhouse and a turntable.
Okay, with a turntable.
Yeah.
Vändskiva på svenska.
Yeah, so they've done a wonderful job preserving everything. I think you showed a short clip a moment ago of a man there in one of the engines, and that was the manager, Paul Hallett, who's a really good manager. I don't know him personally. I've seen him, but he's done a wonderful job overseeing the general operation. He just retired this fall. Somebody else has taken over, but a very enthusiastic guy who really loved his work. And here's a typical train. That's Paul Hallett there.
Okay, he's retired now.
He's just retired this last fall, last autumn. Here's a good example. This is the ticket booth, and they have volunteers. Most of these folks are volunteers who work as conductors and train people. And they're all railroad fans, I think most of them, who like what they're doing and volunteer a day or two here or there. And this is a typical train, typical scene on the train. This happens to be the coach, one of the coaches. And all these coaches are vintage coaches going back to the early 1900s, some as late as the 1950s. This is what used to be probably a parlor car, what we call a parlor car in the States. They even have a dome car, I might add, where you have a glass top dome.
Oh, okay, dome car.
Yes,
and
right. That is so popular that you have to make a reservation at least a year in advance in order to get a seat on that. So we had a dome car on the train we were on, but we weren't able to sit in there. But we were lucky enough to spend most of our time in the dining car. But dome cars, if you've never had a chance to do that in Sweden, come to the States, and you can, if you reserve far enough in advance, you can do it on the Conway Scenic Railway. But they also have a dome car. They run in the summertime on the regular passenger Amtrak passenger train between Portland, Maine, and Boston. And that's proven very, very popular. So you can see there the rear end car is a observation car, is what we call, and that would probably go back to the 1920s. And they have a wonderful collection of equipment. They really know how to run that railroad. Some tourist railroads in New England and America have failed for various reasons, but probably mostly because of just poor business management expertise. But these folks, they know how to run a very smooth operation, and everything was clockwork and handled exactly right for the benefit of the tourists, so you feel like you're getting your money's worth.
I think you have a good tip to do if you want to go into the U.S. and are interested in going
Oh,
in
highly recommend
the
that.
Conway Scenic Railway in New Hampshire.
In North Conway, New Hampshire.
North.
And they have obviously a website. You can Google on that and see a lot of what you've just seen.
If you hurry up, you will get a seat in the dome car next year.
Yeah, exactly. But they operate roughly from the second week of April, once the snow starts melting, through to the end of October. And during the autumn seasons, the fall foliage is really spectacular.
We saw some pictures from the fall. Yes.
Yeah.
And if you need some kind of guide, you just call.
Yeah, don't inundate me with
call
calls.
him, and he will probably follow you along and tell you all the stories about this railway and other railways also in the US.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's going to happen. Okay, we agree that we should be very brief on this webcast. We failed. We have not been brief.
Whatever. I wasn't sure what you meant by brief, and probably I talked too much. But
no, not at all. I think everyone enjoyed what you were talking about.
I wanted them to get a good complete picture.
We also have some more subjects that we could cover in a later webcast, perhaps.
Sure.
And if I come to the US, perhaps we can discuss something also.
Sure.
Okay. So, Phil, thank you very much for sharing your experience, your memories.
So happy to, John Eric.
And I know that you're interested in history and such. You're devoting some time, a great amount of your time to the museum on your island also.
Yes, yeah.
So you're really interested in history.
I'm interested in history, not only railroad history, but local history in my area especially. So I'm involved in that up there. Cranberry Island.
So, okay, you can visit Cranberry Island also. He will show you everything that.
Cranberry Island is located 3 miles south of Mount Desert Island, which is where Bar Harbor is, and Southwest Harbor. So it's a much smaller island offshore. You can only get there by boat.
Okay, and your wife is going to serve lobster rolls now?
I'm sorry, what now?
And your wife Karin is going to serve lobster rolls.
At where? At the...
on the island?
At the cafe, yes, yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Phil, and then we close it up, and I hope you enjoyed this one. This was the very first one that we tried to make a live webcast in English also, but you have to try. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it, make a thumbs up. If you don't enjoy it, two thumbs up.
Well, I enjoyed it anyhow.
We enjoyed it.
Folks.
Yeah, if you have any questions and so on, you can just write them down in the comments, and we will also provide you with some links to this railway, so
sure.
if you would like to go on it. it seems a very good opportunity. Though.
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah. Hej då.
Hej då!